to understand what's going on, you need to bring the logs from each of those environments together to be able to get a holistic picture. And that's the key to log unification, is to gather that information together to a position where you can see what is going on end to end in your solution.
From Toro Cloud, this is the Coding Over Cocktails podcast, a free pool of thoughts and ideas from IT experts, thought leaders, and authors, sharing their insights and advice for individuals architecting solutions for the ever-changing landscape of enterprise tech, digital transformation, and more. Welcome to episode 69 of the Coding Over Cocktails podcast. My name is Kevin Montalvo. Joining us is Toro Cloud CEO and founder, David Brown. Good day, David.
Hi, Kevin.
All right. Our guest for today has spent over 25 years in the software industry with a breadth of experience in different businesses and environments, from multinationals to software startups, end user businesses to consultancies working with UK and internationally known brands and organizations. He is the author of Logging in Action with Fluentd, Kubernetes, and more, which teaches readers how to record and analyze application and infrastructure data using Fluentd. We'll talk about that book today, and if you stick around until the end of the show, you'll learn how you can get a copy for yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us for a round of cocktails is Phil Wilkins. Hey, Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good day to everybody.
All right. Good day. So let's begin. Systems have been producing logs for decades. What is and what has caused the emergence of unified logging?
So logging's always been around, but what we've seen over probably the last 20 years is systems becoming more and more distributed in their construction. It used to be we'd run a couple of servers in parallel, maybe in an active-active or active standby combination, so we'd need to bring the logs together. But as virtualization was introduced, we saw that extend even further. And then in the last 5 to 10 years, containerization has driven that even further, particularly microservices. So now you've got one application might be spread across multiple environments. And to understand what's going on, you need to bring the logs from each of those environments together to be able to get a holistic picture. And that's the key to log unification, is to gather that information together to a position where you can see what is going on end to end in your solution.
And is that, like, when you talk about servers running in parallel or a distributed system or a cluster of servers and unifying the logs across those, is it unifying the logs across the same application servers, or is it also across tiers of the application? Unifying the logs across say, the network tier, the database tier, the application tier. Is that what unified logging is about as well?
Yes. So many people are on a journey of varying levels of maturity, and what you've described is almost like the path of maturity for log unification. To start with, just get your app servers talking, that's probably the easiest. Mm-hmm. But your infra guys are going to be wanting to also look at what you're doing and what's happening on the server infrastructure. Your DBAs are going to want to know how hard you're pushing their database. So if they see database performance issues, it's like, well, is that something that's happening in my database, or consumer saturating me with requests? And the more you can bring that information together, the better your understanding is of your landscape. Yeah, an application or server does not operate in isolation.
Yes, of course. So what is the difference between log analytics and unified logging?
So log analytics, like most analytical processes, is about processing a volume of data, analyzing, looking for trends quite often, and patterns in the data, whether that's a log entry or transactional records. The log unification is about getting the logs together. So all these independent components that are contributing to the sum total of your environment and solution. You need to get those together and bring that data into a single place to be analysed. Now, one of the tricks with more contemporary unification tools is that rather than just grabbing the data, putting it into a big pot to be later analysed, is you can start to do some event-based processing. And it enables you to be a lot more reactive now. So rather than waiting an hour for the next analytical run to happen, perhaps on your environment, the unification tool can go, that's an exception, and I've been given some routing rules to say this exception is particularly important. I'm going to go and ping Joe Blogs and tell him that exception has happened now.
Yes. I'm glad you brought up the tooling, because your book talks extensively about Fluentd, which is an extensible open source framework for data collection that filters and routes logs for their consumption. When you look at a diagram of Fluentd and how it routes logs from the source to their destinations, it looks kind of like a middleware ESB type tool, right? But it's specifically designed for log analytics. And you mentioned some of the it can do more than just routing of logs. It can actually do some event-based processing as well. So can you just run us through how Fluentd can help with this unified logging?
Sure. So the first thing in being able to unify your logs is to be able to gather the log content up from a vast pool of resources. That could be your system logs, SNMP traps in your infrastructure, through to many, many different types of application logging formats. We're in the world of polyglot now. So your end-to-end enterprise might be running the combination of .NET solutions and Java and Node, and the list goes on. And they don't all work in the same log format, so being able to cope with that's important. And then, once you've started to ingest those, you need to do a number of things. One, you've got to decide whether the log event is of help or of use. Sometimes, particularly with more brittle solutions, you may be deployed and everything's running smoothly, but there are debug logs being put into your logging, and people become nervous of any change. So rather than go and changing that system, if it's running and its log configurations, or even in the code to change the log thresholds, it's easier to say, okay, we'll put rules in to filter that out into the unification process, so we don't take it any further than where we've grabbed it from, and you're not polluting your aggregated views of all the logs with any undue noise. So you can do that. You can route it to different systems as well. In larger organizations, you'll get specialist teams that are dealing with monitoring of your solution. Traditionally, your sysadmins will work with tools like Nagios that are focused on more the infrastructure. Other tools will be more focused on application logs. If you feed into Logzio and things like that, you're more oriented towards supporting the app dev and the app ops teams. And they want a different set. They're less interested in the minutiae of what's happening on the server unless it's significant. And want to know more about what's happening at the application and the database layer in terms of how their SQL is performing and what SQL is being executed. Mm-hmm. So you can start to route out to the different tools the right events rather than saying, okay, everybody's got to use this one tool that's enterprise-wide edict. Says that shall only use this. So you can start to think about your best of breed if you want. So that's one of the key use cases. The one that I like to show to get people thinking about it is more the the social alerting, if you like, or the collaborative mechanisms where you can tease out specific events which are forewarners of something significant. And you can then filter that out when they occur and send a signal to someone, say, look, I've had an event I've recognized as being a warning to a bigger problem. But if you get in there quick, because you know that you've got, say 5 minutes before things go belly up, you can get in there and prevent it rather than cure it, which is a lot more useful.
Interesting. And if I'm guessing, I'm just thinking about how we get the data into Fluentd in the first place. So I imagine with popular frameworks, there are connectors or pre-built for Fluentd to ingest the logs from popular systems. What if my system is not available as an out-of-the-box connector? What do I need to do to prepare my data so they can be consumed by Fluentd?
So the simplest and the most common approach to that sort of thing is to just let your application log as it does. Typically that's a file or a rotating file. Sometimes people will write to database. And what you can do is rather than connect your application directly to Fluentd through an appender in your logging framework, which is the more optimal route, you can set Fluentd up to say, right, I'm going to trail that file or going to go every minute and grab the latest entries in that database. When you're developing, if you're working with a Linux environment, you'll be familiar with the idea of tail -f, where you're just literally watching the end of a log file as events go through. Well, Fluentd's got some fairly sophisticated connectors that are able to do that for you, and therefore it's hovering up the events as they go, and that way you make no invasive change on the application, which is ideal for those sensitive, brittle use cases, those legacy systems that everybody is terrified of touching, but are so critical to your business that the sooner you know that things are going awry, the better.
And is it a client server? Is there an agent running on my server, Fluentd agent, which is collecting and sending those logs to a Fluentd server, or am I streaming the logs to a server?
So you can set it up, and this is the beauty of Fluentd, because it's had to deal with particularly the world of microservices and IoT. You can deploy it as a central solution, and you can either stream to it, which you can receive the streams, or if your network will allow it, it can reach out and connect. But the more common model is to put agents, use Fluentd in its agent model, and deploy it closely to the application. And in the world of microservices, you can see this happen in a number of ways. You can deploy Fluentd as a sidecar using that kind of deployment pattern. If you're using a service mesh, then there's an element of Fluentd engaged with through Istio, for example. But even on your legacy environments, you can put a small footprint agent, Fluentd node, in with your server right next to it and run it as a parallel process, because it's such a small footprint. And there is a version of Fluentd, I call it like the little brother, because it uses the exact same principles, but it's stripped back, and the kernel is written in C, called Fluentbit. And Fluentbit has got such a small footprint, it is very easy to actually deploy into Internet of Things devices, and it's designed to, rather than doing any of that processing, filtering, it's designed to just grab and forward. So it is a true agent in that sense, whereas Fluentd can act as the server as well as an agent.
Mm-hmm. You also wrote that log processing is only as good as the logs that are generated. that's a quote from your book. Sounds like the old adage of garbage in, garbage out. So how do we generate better log data?
Yes, you couldn't summarize it better to call it garbage in, garbage out. If you're writing logs and just treating them as quick hacks to help you debug and do local testing, then your logs are going to be difficult to understand, if not meaningless, a year, 2 years, 5 years down the line, when you're no longer involved with it, and the messages you put in there are a bit unique to your understanding. So the best thing you can do, whether you're writing to a file or using Fluentd or something else even, is to think about the content that you're putting into the message, and make sure that it's meaningful but data aware. If you're dealing with a financial system, just dumping the entire transaction could create you some real headaches, because you could be writing sensitive data into the log. Mm-hmm. So, you have to start thinking about logging almost as important as your transaction itself that you're processing. And the more semantically meaningful and the more insight that you offer into that log, the better. So pumping out the key variables into a log entry that affect how your application is behaving is always going to make your logs more useful. And trying to show or provide it in a structured manner will mean that it's going to be an awful lot easier to start expressing these rules, whether that's in the unification layer of Fluentd, or even downstream when you start to do log analytics. If you understand the structure of the data being logged, it's an awful lot easier to tease out meaningful assets and tease out activity.
Makes sense. What's the difference between an audit event and a log event?
So they're very much the same thing. An audit event differentiates itself normally by the fact that it's going to be used beyond just understanding operational state and application behavior, insofar as you can record audit events through your logging framework as well. But they're there to not only perhaps help you understand your application and what it's up to, but you will use it to support evidence of compliance and things like that, or dealing with security things. So who signed in and out and when, for example, you can characterize as an audit event, just that someone's logged in or there's the login logic is running. That's more of just a log, traditional event log. Because you can't tease out the meaning from it. So the audit's very much to be able to trail and show what people are doing and what's happening in your system. So if someone comes and says they think there's a data leak, you can go to your audit trails and go, okay, this is what actually went on, and I can account to governance bodies that my system is running true and correct.
Why is it important to distinguish between audit events and log events? Is we treating them set differently in terms of unified logging?
In the short term, you're probably not going to treat them that differently, but the key difference is because audit is supporting compliance, you're likely to have rules about how long you record that information from, and you might need to store it slightly separately so it's easier to pull it out. To present it if you have to show evidence of compliance activities.
Mm-hmm. You've devoted a section to your book about achieving clear language, which was succeeded by human and machine-readable. Can you expound on the importance of these factors, clear language and human and machine-readable?
Yeah, so we've all developers have probably done it at some time or another. Got really bored of writing log entries and put something funny in there. it's going to throw an exception. So I put Geronimo in there or something like that, just to lighten the process, because it can get tedious if you're having to write lots of very dry log entries. But if you do that and leave that there, that really doesn't tell anybody anything meaningful when it's not you. I will know what it means because I wrote it and know where to go looking for it, and perhaps it might reflect a particular exception that was annoying me during testing. But for an ops team, which you're not, even in a DevOps environment, where the developer is involved in the operations, sooner or later you're going to move on to a new project or a new product, and someone's got to keep your solution alive. So, the more meaningful, the more easier it is to understand that statement in the eyes of another person, the better it's going to be. So we need to think about that. And therefore we do need to be aware of our semantics and our technical language. If you're going to use specific terms, that's great, because it helps understanding of the meaning, because if in the language of accounting a particular type of transaction, you call it that transaction, but make sure that there is a dictionary of terms, if you like. And you can add more meaning when you're dealing particularly with error scenarios by using things like unique error codes. And that allows you to then attach far more comprehensive information explaining what the causes of this error can be, what the remediation. So you're giving more meaning again, rather than just saying, I've caught an exception, here's the stack trace, move along. So adding that detail is really helpful. And then in terms of making it machine readable as well, this comes back to the workload involved in processing it. If you make it easier to process the log events, so give it structure, then the easier it is to either in the event stream make it actionable. So if I get an event with this attribute which has a particular value, that's a lot easier than trying to run a regex across a stream of consciousness text to tease out and say, actually, I need to tell someone now about this, rather than just send it to the log analytics platform, or route it a count of this type of event in the last 30 seconds into Prometheus.
Now, in that regard, what are you suggesting? Like a JSON format, or an XML, or simple CSV? Is it, so long as it's machine readable?
It's all down to the culture of the organization. Some are better than others. JSON's better than XML because it's less verbose, but still carries the readable meaning. CSVs, if you're doing that, at least that you can see each of the values, but you put more cognitive workload on the consumer that's looking at it, because you've got to know what each column is in a CSV. You really don't want to repeat the header every time you write a CSV row. You can do, but it just is harder to read.
And Fluentd is dealing natively in JSON format, right?
Internally, it processes everything as JSON. So every log event will get a very basic JSON event structure applied to it, even if you're only sending it text. Because what it does is it takes the log event and treats that as an element called the message, and it will attach a timestamp to it, and you can link other metadata to that as well. And of course, then in Fluentd, you can start doing things like examining the payload in your configuration then, because it's able to interpret JSON very easily.
Right. We've talked about clear language, achieving clear language. What about context? So can you explain what is the context of logging?
So the context is all about really trying to facilitate the person looking at the log and understanding in what conditions did it occur. When we have errors, you really need to help you diagnose things. You need to know what's going on around it. It's imagine yourself in a forest, but you can't see. You hear a loud thump. Now, is that a tree falling, or is that a wild animal running around in the forest that's about to steamroller you? If you give more context, the better you're able to understand that problem or the situation you're in, and therefore what to do. You hear that tree go down. Well, if you can also feel the wind blowing against your face really strongly, you've probably got a storm, and that might be just a tree falling over because it's been blown down. Whilst not great, unless it happens right next to you, not a problem. But if that thump is sounding more like flash against something hard, you're probably going to want to go run somewhere or try, because that could be a bear coming for you. In that forest. And what I'm trying to say is the more information you can associate with the event when you record it, the easier it is to diagnose and determine that path of action. So if you were throwing if we take that to a database connection issue being thrown, what's the URI of that database? So is it a particular database that's causing the problems? And that helps not only in the short term, but also in the log analytics phase of, okay, is it the same database that seems to periodically throw a wobbly and cause me a connection issue? Or is it the same server that's causing me a problem because actually it's developing a fault, but it's intermittent?
It's interesting. Like, there's so much value in what you're saying. And do you find that logging and this attention to logging, the language, the machine-readable formats, the context, is logging getting as much love as it should in the developer community?
To be honest, I think we can always do better. We're always under pressure to deliver and get things out the door. So we tend to write logging when we're thinking about and working on testing our own application. So we tend to think about it from the viewpoint of what do I need now, rather than looking at the application and going, well, this code could be alive in 10 years. I don't want to have someone asking me about code I wrote years and years ago if I'm still in the same organization, or worse, something's gone wrong in the middle of the night, and the first tier of support have just got me out of bed at 2 a.m. after I've been out and had my cocktails, and they're asking me, what does this log message mean? Because they're trying to figure out how to get an application back on its feet. And they got management screaming at them that a major system is down and the business is losing revenue. So the more you do to your logs to make it easier for people to deal with those situations, and most importantly the unexpected, because that's we write code to deal with the expected conditions. It's the unexpected ones that are always the issue. The more we do to help ourselves and think about those, the better our lives are going to be.
And your book talks extensively about Fluentd, or references Fluentd as a tool set for unified logging. But the book itself goes into the principles of logging, obviously in great detail as well. Is Fluentd the only game in town, or are there other solutions for unified logging?
No, there are quite a lot of solutions out there. Log unification is a newer idea, so there are a smaller set of products out there for it. But probably the biggest one that lines up with Fluentd that people have heard of is Logstash. Through the Elastic organization, and is part of the well-known Elk stack. And you can swap the Logstash for Fluentd, and it becomes the EFK stack or EFK. So there are options out there in that direction. You can go to the more classic aggregation model and log analytics. There are plenty of well-known products that do that. Splunk is probably one of the best-known commercial ones, which again has this agent model with the ability to interpret and grab a lot of different data sources. But the key difference is it tends to work on the basis of pump it back to the Splunk core data storage and process things there.
What about the public cloud providers? What are they doing in this space?
So they're interesting. For the hyperscalers, Google, AWS, I'm not so familiar with Azure, Oracle. They all have actually built support or actually leverage big chunks of the Fluentd toolset under the hood. Oracle, for example, actually use a lot of it and can ingest Fluentd events. So they give you an endpoint in your account and you can fire your events straight at it as if you're talking to a Fluentd node, which makes life really easy. GCP actually was one of the first to start adopting the Fluentd framework and building it into part of their logging mechanisms on their cloud native platform. So it's quite conversant with Fluentd as well. And a lot of these providers are offering means to consume Fluentd events. Some of them also allow you to actually pull out of their environment using Fluentd connectors, log events as well, which makes life really easy. So if you're using a PaaS or a SaaS service where you can't get in at the monitoring that's going on, you might be able to pick up some of the behavioral information through actually going and examining its log collection using Fluentd and pump it into whatever system that you want to use. And that's really useful when you're getting into a multi-cloud or a hybrid use case.
Really interesting stuff. The book is called Logging in Action, published by Manning. Phil, how can our listeners stay in touch with what you're writing about? Do you use particular social media channels or a blogging platform to communicate with public?
So I'm on WordPress and I blog across a number of subjects, including adding extra tidbits and information that support and work with the book. And I can be found on two addresses, either phil@mp3monster.org. So that's my email. So it's mp3monster.org or blog.mp3monster.org. That's pretty easy to remember. The other one is cloud-native.info, which is perhaps a more meaningful one for most. A lot less esoteric given the content that I write about a lot of the time.
Fantastic. Phil Wilkins, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Hey listeners, hope you had a wonderful time with that conversation. For those who stuck around, we've got a very special surprise for you. We're giving away 3 copies of Phil's book, Logging in Action by Manning Publications. Simply follow us on Twitter @ToroCloud, like and retweet our contest post. Again, thanks for joining us in this podcast. Please like and subscribe, and check out our website @ToroCloud.com for a transcript of this episode and show notes. On behalf of the team here at Toro Cloud, thank you very much for listening to us today. This has been Kevin Montalvo for Coding Over Cocktails. Cheers.